It was a rainy evening when I first saw her. I had been feeling restless, something I couldn't explain, and decided to take a walk in the park near my home. The world seemed muted under the weight of the rain, the streets empty, save for the occasional figure with an umbrella. That's when I saw her. She was sitting alone on a bench, wrapped in a threadbare coat, her eyes distant, lost in her thoughts. The world around her seemed to blur into the background, and she seemed so small, so fragile against the vastness of the city. Her name was Anissa, and I had never noticed her before. But now I couldn't seem to look away. She worked as a maid at my fiancé's family mansion, and even though we had crossed paths many times, I had never paid her any mind. I was too absorbed in my own life, my own world of luxury and privilege, where people like her were mere shadows in the background. That day, though, something about her stillness spoke to me, and I found myself walking toward her. "Are you all right?" I asked, unsure why I was even speaking to her. She looked up, her eyes flickering with surprise, almost as if she hadn't expected anyone to acknowledge her existence. "Yes, I'm fine," she replied softly, her voice quiet, but there was a sadness to it that made my heart ache. I wasn't expecting her to open up to me, and she didn't. But somehow, as I sat next to her, the silence between us became comfortable. The rain continued to fall, and for the first time in months, I felt a strange peace, a calm that I couldn't find in the chaos of my life. We didn't talk much, but something about being there with her made me realize how little I knew about the world outside my bubble. The next few weeks passed, and I found myself looking for reasons to visit the mansion, not for the sake of my fiancé, but for Anissa. I would find excuses to linger near her, to talk to her. We never spoke about anything particularly deep, but there was something about her presence that made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. Then came the evening that changed everything. It was the night of my engagement party, a grand affair with people from every corner of our social circle. As I stood beside my fiancé, laughing and chatting, I couldn't help but feel an emptiness gnawing at me. I looked around the room, at the sparkling lights and the laughter, and yet it all felt so distant, so hollow. My fiancée, Sophia, was beautiful, intelligent, and kind, qualities that anyone would envy. We had been together for years, and everyone expected us to get married. But something inside me was stirring, a growing discomfort that I couldn't ignore. Then my eyes met hers. Anissa was standing in the corner of the room, quietly observing. Her dress was simple compared to the extravagant gowns everyone else was wearing, but she stood there with a quiet dignity, almost untouched by the opulence surrounding her. I couldn't explain it, but in that moment I knew. I knew that my life had been built on expectations, not on what I truly wanted. The realization hit me like a wave, and it was suffocating. I excused myself from the party and found a quiet spot outside, my heart racing. The sound of the rain from that evening echoed in my mind. I had been running from the truth for so long. My heart wasn't with Sophia, no matter how perfect our lives seemed. It was with Anissa. But how could that be? How could I betray everything I had worked for, everything that everyone expected of me? I stood there, conflicted, my thoughts swirling. I love Sophia. She was everything anyone could ever ask for in a partner, but I wasn't in love with her. I had been in love with the idea of her, of the life we would build together, but I had never truly looked into her heart. The truth was, I was falling for Anissa. She was nothing like the woman I was engaged to, nothing like the world I had always known. But she made me feel things I never thought I was capable of. Her quiet strength, the way she didn't need to speak to make an impact, the way she showed me what life was really about, it was all-consuming. And in that moment, I knew that everything I had been holding on to was a lie. I had a decision to make. The days following my engagement party were filled with confusion and self-doubt. I couldn't shake the image of Anissa, standing there in the corner of the room, so out of place among the wealth and luxury that surrounded her. It haunted me, her quiet dignity, the simplicity of her life. And it wasn't just her presence that consumed me, it was the way she made me feel, a feeling I hadn't felt in years. I realized that I had been living a life of convenience, not one of passion or truth. Sophia noticed the change in me, of course. She always did. She was observant in her own way, and I could tell she was growing frustrated with my distance. She tried to pull me back into the world we had built together, but the more she tried, the further I drifted. I felt like I was suffocating, trapped in a life that wasn't my own. And the worst part was, I knew I was about to hurt her. One afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to see Anissa. I had to know if what I was feeling was real, or if it was just a fleeting moment of confusion. I left Sophia at home, under the pretense of needing some time to myself, and made my way to the mansion. I had to see Anissa again to find out if there was even a chance that she felt what I was feeling. I arrived just as the sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the grounds. The mansion stood like a fortress, imposing and cold. The staff had mostly gone home for the day, leaving the house eerily quiet. I walked inside, past the grand staircase, and through the halls until I found myself in the back, near the kitchen where I knew Anissa would be. There she was, cleaning the counters, her back to me. I hesitated for a moment, wondering what I was even doing here. But before I could turn around and leave, she spoke, her voice calm, but filled with a warmth that made my heart skip a beat. "I knew you'd come," she said, not turning around. I froze, taken aback by her words. "How did you know?" I asked, stepping closer. Anissa turned to face me, a small smile playing on her lips. "You've been different lately." "I can see it in your eyes," she replied softly. "You don't belong here, do you?" Her words pierced through me. I hadn't realized it, but she was right. I didn't belong in this life, this world of luxury and pretense. I belonged in a world that felt real, raw, and full of truth. And for the first time, I understood that it was her world I wanted to be in. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I'm engaged to Sophia, and yet I can't stop thinking about you. I don't know what to do." Anissa didn't flinch at my confession, her expression soft but unreadable. She walked toward me, slowly, and for a moment, I thought she might say something that would make everything clear. But instead, she stopped just in front of me and said something that made my chest tighten with guilt. "You have everything, don't you?" she asked quietly. "You have wealth, status, a future that's set. What more do you need?" I didn't know how to answer her. The truth was, I had never truly understood what I needed until now. All I had ever wanted was the approval of others, to live a life that everyone would envy. But in that moment, I realized that none of that mattered. What mattered was how I felt when I was with her. "I need you," I said before I could stop myself. "I don't know what to do, but I need you." Her eyes softened, and for a brief second, I thought I saw something like hope flicker in them. But it was gone just as quickly as it had appeared. She took a step back, her gaze shifting to the floor. "You don't understand," she murmured, shaking her head. "You don't know what it's like to live in my world, to be someone who's always invisible. You don't understand the consequences of choices like these." I reached out to her, but she pulled away, her face filled with sorrow. "I can't be the reason you ruin your life, ruin your future. I can't do that to you." I stood there, staring at her, the weight of her words sinking in. The truth was, I wasn't just scared of ruining my life. I was terrified of leaving behind everything I had worked for, everything I had known. But at the same time, I was more afraid of living a life that wasn't mine. A life that never truly meant anything. "I don't care about my future if it means living without you," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "I don't care about any of it. I just need to know if you feel the same way." Anissa was silent for a long time. The quiet between us seemed to stretch forever. But then, finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," she said, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "But I can't be the one to tell you what to do. I can't make that decision for you. You have to decide what kind of life you want to live." Her words hit me like a wave. She was right. I was the one who had to make the choice, the one who had to decide if I was willing to walk away from everything to follow my heart. As I stood there, watching her turn away, I realized that the path I was about to take would change everything. But the hardest part wasn't making the decision, it was living with it. The days that followed were a blur. I couldn't focus on anything: work, family, even Sophia. Everything felt distant, as if I were living in a fog. The only thing I could think about was Anissa and the choice that lay before me. I had never imagined myself in a situation like this. I had always been the one with everything except the one thing I truly wanted. I avoided Sophia as much as I could, unable to face her, knowing deep down that I wasn't the person she thought I was. I had been a dutiful fiancé, yes, but I had never been in love with her. And now, in the midst of this whirlwind, I realized just how much I had been lying to myself. Sophia deserved someone who could give her all of me, someone who was truly present, not someone torn between two lives. The guilt gnawed at me, but it was nothing compared to the uncertainty that plagued my mind. Was I making the right decision? Could I truly walk away from everything I had built, the comfort, the stability, the approval of my family and friends? Anissa was a different world entirely. She was quiet, humble, and seemed to carry the weight of an invisible burden, a life that had been shaped by struggles I couldn't even begin to understand. She wasn't from my world, and I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to leave everything I knew behind to join hers. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that what I was feeling wasn't just about her, it was about me. I had spent my whole life living according to other people's expectations, trying to fulfill a role that had never been mine. And now, standing on the edge of a decision that could ruin everything I had worked for, I knew deep down that I couldn't live with myself if I didn't follow my heart. One evening, I couldn't take the weight of it any longer. I knew what I had to do, and I couldn't keep dragging it out. I had to talk to Sophia. I had to be honest with her, even if it meant breaking her heart and mine in the process. I drove to her apartment, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. When I arrived, I found her sitting on the couch, her eyes searching my face as if she already knew something was wrong. The silence between us was suffocating. "Sophia, I need to talk to you," I said, my voice strained. She didn't respond immediately, just nodded, waiting for me to speak. I could see the hope in her eyes, the expectation that whatever was coming next would be something she could fix. But I knew it was beyond fixing. "I can't do this anymore," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "I can't marry you, Sophia. I can't live a life that isn't true to who I am." Her face froze, and for a moment, I thought I saw something like disbelief flash in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You're just going through a phase, right? This will pass." I shook my head. "No, it won't. I'm not in love with you, Sophia. Not the way you deserve. I've been pretending for so long, but I can't do it anymore. I'm in love with someone else." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Her expression shifted from disbelief to hurt, and then to something that looked almost like betrayal. "Who?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't have to say her name. The look on my face was enough. Sophia's eyes widened, and then, as if the weight of my words had crushed her, she looked away, tears welling up in her eyes. "I never meant to hurt you," I continued, my heart aching. "But I can't live a lie. I can't marry you when my heart is somewhere else." Sophia stood up, her body trembling with emotion. "You're choosing her, aren't you? A maid, a woman who doesn't even belong in your world. You're willing to throw everything away for her." Her words stung, but they were true. Anissa didn't belong to my world. She didn't have the wealth, the status, the connections. But in that moment, I realized that none of that mattered. What mattered was that she made me feel seen, understood, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was living for something real. "I don't care about the world, Sophia. I care about what's real. And right now, what's real is her." Sophia's face crumpled in pain, and for a moment, I thought she might say something else, something that would make me second-guess myself. But instead, she turned away, unable to look at me. "I can't believe this," she whispered, her voice breaking. I thought we had something real. I wanted to say something to make it better, but I knew there was nothing I could say. The truth had already been laid bare, and there was no turning back. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice thick with regret. "But I have to go." I left her apartment, feeling like I was walking away from a life I had once known. But as I drove, the weight of the decision began to settle in. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't clean, but it was right. I was choosing to follow my heart, to walk a path that was uncertain but true. And somehow, even in the midst of the pain and confusion, I knew I was doing the right thing. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be consequences, and I would have to face them. But as I pulled up to Anis's modest apartment later that night, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. This was the beginning of something new, something real. And no matter how hard the journey would be, I was ready to face it. I stood outside Anis's apartment, my heart pounding in my chest. The world felt different now, as if I had crossed a threshold that couldn't be undone. Every part of me, every decision, led to this moment. As I rang the doorbell, I felt a strange mix of fear and anticipation. When the door opened, Anis's face lit up with surprise, but there was something hesitant in her eyes. She hadn't expected me. She never did. I realized then how little I had truly understood her life. While I had lived with everything handed to me on a silver platter, she had lived with uncertainty and struggle. Every choice was a battle, every day a test. And yet, here I was, hoping for something more, hoping for her. "You came," she said, her voice quiet but filled with a warmth that made my chest ache. She stepped aside, letting me in. "What's going on?" I could tell she already knew something was different in the way I stood there, my eyes searching hers, but I couldn't find the right words to explain it all. I've made a decision," I said, unsure if it was the right moment to spill everything out, but knowing that I couldn't leave anything unsaid anymore. Anissa didn't say anything, just nodded, waiting for me to continue. Her calmness only made my nerves worse. "I've left Sophia," I blurted out, watching her reaction closely. Her eyes widened for a moment, and then she blinked as if she hadn't quite processed the words. "What do you mean?" "Left her." "As in, you broke off the engagement?" she asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and caution. I nodded. "Yes. I can't marry her. I can't live a life that's not my own anymore. I've been lying to myself for so long, pretending to be someone I'm not. I don't want to live like that anymore, Anissa. I want to live for what feels real." She looked at me, her expression unreadable. Then, without warning, she stepped back, pacing the small living room. The space felt even smaller in that moment, as if the walls were closing in on us. "You think it's that simple?" she said sharply, her voice trembling with emotion. "You think you can just walk away from everything, the life, the people who've built you up, because of this? Because of me?" I flinched at the sharpness in her voice. I hadn't expected her to react like this. For a moment, she seemed like a stranger, someone full of anger and fear, and I felt the weight of what I had just done. "I didn't come here to make things harder for you," I said quietly, taking a step toward her. "I came here because I'm choosing to be with you. Because I can't imagine my life without you." Her eyes flashed with something deeper than just pain. "You don't understand, do you?" she whispered, as if speaking to herself. She turned away, her back to me as she stared out the window. "You don't know what it's like. You don't know what it means to give up everything for someone else." The words hit me like a slap, and I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "Anissa," she turned back to face me, tears welling in her eyes, her hands clenched at her sides. "I'm not some prize for you to claim," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm not some escape from your perfect life. I have my own life, my own struggles, and I'm not asking you to sacrifice everything for me." I stepped forward, my heart aching with every word she spoke. I'm not asking for a perfect life. I don't need wealth or status, Anissa. I need you. I've never needed anything more in my life. But she shook her head, her expression hardening. You don't get it. You think you can just leave everything behind, but your life doesn't stop with a decision. There are consequences. People are going to hate you. Your family. Sophia, they're not just going to walk away. I opened my mouth to argue, but she cut me off. You don't know what it's like to have nothing, she continued, her voice quiet now, but filled with an intensity that made my heart ache. You don't know what it's like to always feel like you're just surviving, trying to find your place in a world that sees you as less than. Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, I truly understood. I had spent my life surrounded by privilege and security, never having to worry about where my next meal would come from or whether I would be treated as equal to those around me. Anissa, on the other hand, had lived with nothing but struggle. She had fought for every inch of her life, every breath, and I had never truly seen it until now. I know I can't understand what you've been through, I said softly, but I want to. I want to stand by you. I'm not afraid of the consequences, Anissa. I've spent my life afraid of losing everything that doesn't matter. Now I'm choosing to risk everything for something that does. For a long moment, there was silence between us. Then, slowly, she lowered her gaze, her tears still falling silently. I could see the weight of the decision on her face, the conflict tearing at her. You have no idea how hard this is for me, she whispered, almost to herself. I've never wanted anything more than this, but I can't be the reason you ruin everything. Her voice broke, and I felt a pang of guilt. I had thought I was making the right choice, but now, seeing her like this, I wondered if I was dragging her into a life of pain and hardship, if I was asking too much. I'm not afraid of ruining everything, Anissa, I said, my voice steady, because if I don't have you, then I don't have anything at all. She stood there, tears streaming down her face, torn between her fear of losing me and the reality of what it would mean to be with someone like me. I could see it in her eyes, the battle, the hesitation. And then, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can let you in, she said, her eyes filled with uncertainty. But I can't let you walk away either. It wasn't a yes. It wasn't a no. But it was the first crack in the wall she had built around her heart. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing at the edge of something real. Something worth fighting for. The days that followed were a mixture of hope and doubt, a roller coaster of emotions I hadn't prepared for. Anissa had opened a door, just a crack, but I could feel the tension in the air every time we spoke. She wasn't ready to let me in fully, and I understood that. Her life had taught her to keep her heart guarded, to never let anyone get too close. But with every small step we took together, I felt the walls between us slowly start to crumble. I continued to visit her apartment, though it wasn't as often as I wanted. Anissa still kept her distance, as if unsure whether she could trust me, whether she could really believe that I had chosen her, not just as a rebellion against my old life, but because I truly wanted to be with her. And I had never been more certain of anything in my life. One evening, as the sun set and the room was filled with soft, golden light, Anissa and I sat in the small living room. There was an awkward silence between us, neither of us quite knowing how to bridge the gap that still existed. But I couldn't stay silent for long. Not now, not when everything felt like it was teetering on the edge. I know I've said this before I started, my voice hesitant, but I need you to understand. I'm not running away from my life. I'm running toward something that feels real. And that's you. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with uncertainty. But what if this isn't real? She asked softly. What if it's just a moment, a phase? What if you wake up one day and realize this was a mistake? The question hit me hard because I had thought about it too. What if I was just being swept up in the idea of something different? What if I was just too afraid of my own life to face it? But then, as I looked into her eyes, I knew that this wasn't just a moment. It was everything. I don't think it's a phase, I said, my voice steady. I know what I feel, Anissa. And I'm not afraid of it. I'm afraid of losing you. I'm afraid of walking away from the one person who makes me feel like I'm more than just a title, more than just the man my family expects me to be. Her eyes softened, but she didn't respond right away. Instead, she stood up and moved toward the window, looking out at the city below. I never asked for any of this, she said quietly, her back to me. I didn't ask for you to come into my life. I didn't ask for you to make everything complicated. I watched her, feeling the weight of her words. She was right. I had barged into her life, shaken it up, and now I was asking her to trust me. And I knew she wasn't sure if she could. I'm not asking you to change everything, Anissa, I said, standing up to join her by the window. I'm not asking you to throw away your life and start over. I'm asking you to take a chance on us. On me. She turned to face me, her expression still guarded, but no longer as distant. And what if it doesn't work? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What if we try and it all falls apart? I didn't have an answer. I couldn't promise that everything would be perfect, that we wouldn't face challenges, or that we wouldn't fail. But I could promise one thing. I don't know what the future holds, I said honestly. But I do know that I don't want to face it without you. I'm not afraid of the risk anymore, Anissa. I'm afraid of the regret. And I don't want to regret not trying. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a glimmer of hope, maybe, or perhaps just the possibility of something different. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make my heart skip a beat. Anissa looked away again, but this time it wasn't out of hesitation. It was out of thought, as if she were weighing something in her mind. After a long moment, she spoke again, her voice calm, but with an edge of something I couldn't quite place. Promise me something, she said, her gaze lifting to meet mine. Promise me you won't regret this. Promise me that no matter what happens, you won't look back and wonder if it was worth it. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. I can't promise I won't regret anything, I said, my voice thick with emotion. But I can promise that I'll never regret choosing you. She stood there, looking at me for a long while. I saw the walls in her eyes start to crumble, slowly but surely. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, with everything that had been said and everything that hadn't been. And then, just as I thought she might turn away from me again, she stepped closer. Okay, she said softly. Okay, I'll take that chance. I could hardly believe it. My heart swelled with relief and hope, but there was something else there too, something that scared me. This wasn't going to be easy. We weren't going to have some perfect fairy tale ending. But I knew, deep down, that whatever came next, we would face it together. The moment she said those words, I felt like everything had shifted. The weight that had been on my chest for so long, the weight of uncertainty, of doubt, of guilt, began to lift. It didn't disappear completely, but it became lighter, more manageable. Because now I knew that I wasn't alone in this. We had both taken the first step. We had both chosen something that wasn't guaranteed to work, but that felt right. As the night wore on, we sat together in silence, our hands brushing occasionally, but nothing more. There was still so much to say, so much we hadn't yet shared. But for the first time, I felt the possibility of something new and real between us. And that was enough for now. I didn't know what the future held, but with Anissa by my side, I was ready to face it. And maybe, just maybe, that was all we really needed. Days turned into weeks, and the small moments we shared began to feel like everything. I would visit Anissa almost every evening, not expecting anything grand, but simply wanting to be near her. Our conversations were simple, but they held a weight that felt profound. We didn't rush, we didn't force anything. But with each passing day, the walls that once separated us began to crumble, little by little. One evening, I came to her apartment earlier than usual, the sun barely setting, casting a soft golden light into the room. I knocked on her door, and when she opened it, there was a brief moment where our eyes locked, and I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. It was strange how everything had shifted, how things that seemed impossible just weeks ago now felt possible. "Hey," I said, smiling a little. "I brought takeout." "I thought you might be tired of cooking." She raised an eyebrow, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You're lucky I don't mind takeout," she teased, stepping aside to let me in. As I set the food down on the small kitchen table, she busied herself with finding plates, and I couldn't help but watch her, how easy it felt now, how comfortable. There was no need for pretenses. She wasn't the maid who had to serve me, and I wasn't the wealthy man trying to change her life. We were just two people, sharing space in the same world, working through the mess of everything. "Something's different," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through my thoughts. "You seem calmer." I looked at her, unsure how to explain it. "I guess I am," I said, sitting down at the table. "I've been thinking a lot lately, about everything, about you, about me, about what I want." Her eyes softened, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she joined me at the table, and for a while, we ate in silence, the comfortable kind that had become more frequent between us. The silence was no longer awkward. It was full of unspoken understanding. But then, just as I thought everything was settling, the doorbell rang. Anissa looked up, a confused expression on her face. "Expecting someone?" I asked, though the last thing I wanted was for anything to disturb this moment. She shook her head, standing up to go answer it. "No, but let me check," she said, walking toward the door. My curiosity got the better of me, and I followed her to the hallway. As the door opened, I froze. There, standing in front of us, was Sophia. The sight of her took me completely off guard. I hadn't seen her in weeks, not since I'd broken off our engagement. And yet, here she was, her face pale, her eyes wide with something between concern and anger. "Sophia?" I said, my voice tight. Anissa looked between us, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. "What's going on?" she asked, her tone neutral but clearly caught off guard. Sophia glanced at me, her expression hardening. "I need to talk to you," she said, addressing me, but her gaze flickered to Anissa for a brief second. "Alone." I felt a wave of discomfort wash over me. I had known this conversation was inevitable, but I wasn't prepared for it to happen like this. Not here. Not now. But there was no escaping it. Sophia's presence in my life had been a part of me for so long, and I had left it behind. And yet, here she was, demanding attention. "I think it's better if we just get it over with," I said, motioning for Sophia to come inside. Anissa, still standing by the door, gave me a small, unreadable glance before stepping aside. But I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. I knew she wasn't comfortable with this, and I couldn't blame her. Sophia walked in, but there was a chill in the air now, something unspoken. She stood a few feet away from me, her posture stiff, almost defensive. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Sophia broke the silence. "You left me," she said, her voice shaking with a mix of hurt and anger. "You just walked away. And I don't understand why." I could feel Anissa's presence behind me, watching, but I couldn't look at her. My eyes were fixed on Sophia. "I didn't leave you because of some whim," I said quietly. "I left because I was living a lie. I wasn't being true to myself, Sophia, and I wasn't being true to you." Sophia's face twisted with frustration. "So, what? You're just going to walk away from everything we had? From me?" She took a deep breath, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "What about the future we planned? What about all the promises?" "I can't keep promises I wasn't ready to make," I said, my voice firm but gentle. And I realized that the future we planned wasn't the future I wanted. It wasn't my future. The word stung, and I could see the pain in Sophia's eyes, but I had no choice but to be honest with her. I couldn't keep pretending. Not for her, and not for me. There was a long pause, and then Sophia turned her gaze to Anissa, who had been standing silently by the kitchen, watching everything unfold. "And who is this?" Sophia asked, her voice cold now, her eyes narrowing slightly. "The reason you walked away from me?" Anissa didn't flinch, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. She stood her ground, meeting Sophia's gaze with a calmness that almost made me proud. "I'm not the reason he left you," Anissa said softly but firmly. "He made his own choice." The words hung in the air for a moment, but Sophia didn't respond right away. She just stood there, the weight of everything sinking in. "You're right," Sophia finally said, her voice quieter now, more resigned than angry. "You made your choice. I just didn't expect it to be this messy." I could feel my chest tightening, my heart heavy with the complexity of the situation. But Sophia wasn't the only person I needed to explain myself to. She wasn't the only person I had hurt. "I'm sorry, Sophia," I said, my voice genuine. "I'm sorry for the way I ended things. You deserved more than that. You deserved a man who knew what he wanted." Sophia's gaze softened for a moment, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. She had always been proud and strong, but in that moment, she seemed small, vulnerable, just a woman who had loved and been left behind. "Goodbye, then," she whispered, before turning and walking toward the door. She paused just before leaving and glanced back at me one last time. "Goodbye," I said softly, watching her walk away. The door clicked shut, and for a moment, there was only silence in the room. Anissa and I stood there, the weight of what had just happened hanging between us. But something had shifted. The tension had broken, the unspoken fears and doubts now in the open. We had both faced the ghosts of my past, and now we could start to rebuild together. Anissa looked at me, her expression unreadable at first. Then she stepped closer, her hand reaching out for mine. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice filled with concern. I nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "Yeah," I said. "I think I finally am." And as the quiet filled the room once more, I felt a sense of calm settle in my chest. No more lies, no more pretending, just us standing together, facing whatever came next. The weight of the moment, the way Sophia had left and the way Anissa's hand rested in mine, felt like the first true breath I had taken in weeks. The world outside continued on, oblivious to everything that had transpired in the last hour, but within these walls, time seemed to stop. It wasn't just the confrontation with Sophia that had changed things, it was the understanding, the shared moment between Anissa and me. We had faced a challenge together, and while the storm of emotions still raged inside me, I felt something stronger than I had before: hope. We didn't say anything for a while, as if both of us were processing everything that had just happened. I could feel the tension in Anissa's body, but her hand in mine remained steady. We didn't need words, we just needed to be there. "I'm sorry you had to see that," I finally said, my voice low, still carrying the weight of what had just unfolded. She shook her head, her gaze not leaving mine. "I'm not sorry I saw it. I needed to. I needed to understand what you were running from, what you were really leaving behind." I wasn't sure if it was the way she said it, or the rawness in her voice, but something inside me cracked open. The way she had stood so firmly beside me, not judging, but understanding, it was exactly what I had needed. Anissa had shown me that it wasn't about running from something, it was about running toward something else. Toward her. I've never been more terrified in my life than I was when I saw her standing at the door, I admitted, the words slipping out before I even had time to stop them. "I was afraid you would hate me, that you'd think I was just using you to escape my old life." Her eyes softened, and she moved closer, her hand still holding mine tightly. "I don't hate you," she whispered, her voice steady, as if reassuring both of us. I just don't want to be part of anyone's mistake. I don't want to be the rebound, the thing you turn to when things go wrong." I felt my heart tighten. She had every right to feel that way, but that was not what I wanted her to think. "Anissa, I don't think of you as a mistake. I'm not with you because of what I was running from. I'm with you because of everything I've come to see in you, your strength, your kindness, your soul." I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a vulnerability she hadn't shown before. But how do you know this is real? How do you know you're not just trying to fix your own life by fixing mine? I could feel the weight of her words in my chest. She wasn't wrong to ask. How could she know I was choosing her for the right reasons when everything between us had started so suddenly, so messily? I don't know if this is real, Anissa, I said quietly, but I know it's real for me. I don't know if I'm doing this the right way, but I'm trying. I'm trying because I believe in what we have, even if it's complicated. She seemed to think about this for a long moment. And then, finally, she squeezed my hand and took a deep breath. Okay, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Okay, that was all we needed. We didn't need grand gestures or promises of forever. In that simple acceptance, there was something bigger than anything else we could have said. The fear, the uncertainty, the doubt, all of it was still there, but so was the trust. We were choosing to face whatever came next together. I pulled her into a gentle embrace, holding her tightly, as if telling her without words that I would fight for this, fight for us. I didn't know what the future held or what kind of obstacles we would face, but in that moment, with Anissa in my arms, everything felt right. And sometimes that's all you need to move forward, someone who believes in you, even when you can't fully believe in yourself. As we stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, I heard the faint sound of a car passing by outside, the world continuing to move. But inside, we were standing still. I could feel the weight of everything that had happened between us, the tension that had been slowly building, finally settling. Anissa pulled away slightly and looked up at me, her eyes searching my face. What happens now? She asked softly. I smiled, though it was a tired smile, one that carried with it a new sense of understanding. Now, I said, we take it one day at a time. No more running. Just us. Together. She nodded slowly, her eyes softening, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. There were still challenges ahead, of course. Sophia was only one piece of the puzzle, and my family, well, they weren't going to make this easy. But for now, for this moment, I had everything I needed. And I would fight for it, no matter what. As the night grew darker and the city lights twinkled through the window, we sat together in the quiet, knowing that we had made it through something huge. And no matter what the world threw at us, we had each other. That was enough.